All right. Hopefully, everyone is staying safe and sound out there as we are still in a COVID reality. So, I wanted to get you guys the lecture number 3 for the course. So, I'm going to be covering topics out of chapter 3 on race, on the race book, race and social justice book. So again, like I said before, I like to cover big, broad categories. Won't cover everything. You should be reading the book because you're going to be responsible for giving me a overview of the whole entire book at some point in the course. Look for the question of the day to be put on Facebook after this lecture. So you will receive question of the day, part 3, moving forward. So let's just kind of hop in. So chapter 3 deals with social economics, right? So we have SES, and social economic is determined by how we measure an individual or group's education, income, and employment. So these are highly important things to pay attention to. So in this country, we have upper class, middle class, working class, and underclasses, right? And so if you are most likely in school, like you are actually in school, you are literally working towards being middle class. So regardless of what degree you get, whether it's an associate's degree, a master's degree, a bachelor's, or even a doctorate degree, you're beginning to enter into middle classdom, right? And so since the 1970s, we've had fewer people consider themselves to be middle class. Most consider themselves to be working class or underclass, which is pretty interesting based upon education, social economics, and employment, right? So those are important factors to pay attention to as we are talking about the context of Minnesota as it relates to criminal justice and law enforcement and just race and issues like that. Because there are folks that argue that we don't have a issue over racism, that we actually have an issue over social economics. There are those that would argue either side. There are those that will argue because of racial issues, we have social economic issues. And I tend to fall in the camp that because we haven't gotten things completely figured out racially, that we don't have things figured out social economics, right? And so you can see this in the most poorest of our people, right? And when I say our people, I just mean humanity, right? So there we go. Okay, so there's this idea of the American dream, right? And the question of the day will relate to the American dream, right? And so you've got Martin Luther King Jr., who argued that there is an American dream, while you've got someone like Malcolm X who argued that the American dream is the American nightmare. So I'll get to the question of the day at the very end. But the definition of the American dream is quite simply that in this country, if you work really hard, you'll have opportunities to improve oneself through social economics, right? So if you apply yourself, you work really hard, you can go from rags to riches. That's pretty much the American dream in a nutshell. And so we'll be discussing that a little bit in this section. But again, I'm looking forward to hearing your question of the day responses. So we have what's called income inequality. And income inequality means that that the money that you're actually receiving isn't enough for you to actually engage in ecoms, right? To ability to pay rent, mortgage, pay your food, heating bill, all those things. A non-sophisticated word is what would be considered the working poor, right? So that you do have a job, but the money that you're bringing in does not actually afford you enough money to do so. Now, when it comes to income, we're talking about cash, right? So there's cash, but there's also wealth. And wealth inequality is like income inequality. The major difference is that wealth includes more than just money. So wealth includes land. It includes being a CEO of a company that you own. But wealth has to do with the things that you actually have that are worth money, right? And so it's not the idea of what you have in your account; it's what you're worth overall. And so you'll find, like, some people will be like, "Oh, this guy's he has $10 million in his bank account, but he's actually worth 17 million," and that the other 7 million has to do with finances, investments, all those types of things, right? And so wealth is more than just money. Wealth is the ability for your investments, your boats, your cars, your houses, your land that you own, and also it also includes a lack of debt, right? And so if you're very, very wealthy, you may have a higher debt than other individuals who are making less than you. But the idea of debt doesn't crush you in the idea of being very wealthy. Okay, and so what we tend to see as it relates to racially, that whites have significantly more wealth than blacks and Hispanics in this country. And when I say wealth, I don't mean just money. I mean land. I mean, again, it's more than just money. And so the idea of someone saying, or anyone saying, if that's a wealthy person, you're talking about more than just money. And whites tend to have more wealth than blacks and Hispanics in this country. And so the way in which we become wealthy or get more wealth is by being able to buy bigger things, like Ted Turner. So Ted Turner is a good example. He is the CEO of Turner Broadcasting Company, and so it's a prime example of most of the land, or quite a few of the natural habitat in Wyoming, is owned by Ted Turner, because he's actually bought land in mass amounts of it, right? And so if it's underdeveloped, most likely it's owned by Ted Turner. They don't allow folks to do that anymore because of how much land he's taken. Legally, right? This is illegal, so it's nothing illegal, but we're not naturally giving over natural resources as in wooded areas like we used to do back in the day. So again, and we also have the figures that whites are most likely to graduate from college. And if that's truly the case, which it is per capita, then you recognize that if getting into school and out of school gives you keys to what we would call middle class status, and there are more whites making it through than people of color, then by default, when white folks are out and about outside of college, they're beginning to build wealth, right? And so wealth is by far more than just money. And so it's important, as you're reading the book, that you are quick to make a quick distinction between money and wealth. And I think a lot of times, a lot of folks don't really care about gaining wealth. They care about gaining money, and money will come and go, right? So, but wealth continues to fold up in itself and outward. Wealth is always expanding. And so if you want to if you had a choice between being wealthy, right? Being wealthy or having lots of money, you would prefer to be wealthy, because that money can be transferred over to kids and the youth and everything else. Males tend to have more wealth than females do in this country, right? So if you're a male, it is easier to build wealth than it is to be female. Most of the growth in female jobs have been in low income sectors, particularly impacted by women of color. And so as you look at building wealth as a woman, it's very difficult. If you are a woman of color, it's just surmounted even more so. And so if we're going to look at how do we change the system, we can take a look at how do we build wealth among women of color in our country. Women are more likely to take off more time to care for their families, which shouldn't impact wealth, but it does, right? We very much live in a patriarchal society that in the U.S., right? Very patriarchal, where men decide how to gain wealth, and basically, whether you are black or white, or regardless of what your color is, the standards of how to build wealth and how to keep wealth rest in the hands of males. So men determine whether they're black, white, Hispanic, Asian, what it means to have wealth. So I want to introduce you to a guy who was he's a African sociologist who's pretty famous, and his name is Frantz Fanon. He was an African American who was raised in France, and he wrote a couple of books, right? So these books, matter of fact, I haven't got into there, but one of them is based upon what would be considered pedagogy of the oppressed, right? And so he wrote a book on education standards. He was a psychologist who wrote lots of articles, but the thing that he wrote that was most impactful was this idea of social psychological perspectives, meaning there's also a psychological understanding of how to gain wealth, right? And so there's this idea of external colonialism that he pretty much made a model for. And it's the idea of when you have colonialism, right? So you had Europeans expanding, leaving their own homes and expanding out. And they were racially the minority visiting other countries, right? And so if you're going to go take over someplace slowly but surely, and you've got very few people, then you have to figure out other ways to do so. And colonialism has taken place in the idea of trading, right? I'll trade you this for that. So there were trades that were going on. There was also the idea of Bibles, right? So they sent missionaries over to help spread Christianity among heathens, or what they called heathens. And the other way would just be bullets, right? And so there's this idea of alienating people in subgroups and putting them in different pockets, and then controlling the mass by controlling small individual groups, right? And so it's how we understand the caste system. So if you look at places like South Africa, and South Africa had a caste system in it to where they call it apartheid. And in apartheid, the Boa, right, the Boa and white South Africans showed up, and they literally spread the different races out by conquering a group and then spreading from the other group. And so apartheid just means separation. And it wasn't until 1994 in which you see the end of apartheid. But until that time, they just separated all the races through power and authority. But they did so with being whites at the top, blacks at the bottom, and then an array of different other races that were in South Africa during that time. And by the way, the system's set up to where if you're on the very bottom, you have very few rights. If you're number one, you have all the rights. If you're number two, you have some rights, 3, 4, and 5, and everything else. And so you're always looking to say, I am better off than the people that are below me. So I'm going to keep the status the way it is. So once a caste system has been set up, it stays that way. So you see this caste system in South Africa with the Boa. And also, I believe, Germans, right? No, it wasn't. I have to double check on that. But for sure, that's right. It was the Dutch. The Dutch in the Boa came in and did that. And then the British did the same thing in India. We have a caste system that's still in place. And I know here in our country, we say we don't have a caste system. That would not be true at all. We do have a caste system, but we don't call it a caste system. What we have is we have social and economic systems in which you've got groups of people that are in a particular group based upon racial markers. So there are 4 major ways to create a colony. The first way is formation of a colony society. It is the idea of coming in and giving good services and deeds where they're not actually, you don't actually have it. So you need fresh water, you need these things. We're going to provide it for you if you do these things. Then there's cultural imposition, which then, if you're giving water, you're like, well, if you're going to get our water, then you need to use English because we don't understand you and we don't want to learn your language. So then you start putting your rights, rituals, traditions, customs, and habits on people, right? The other way to do so is segregating people culturally, right? If your culture is mostly like mine, you can be number 2. If you're least like me, you can be number 3, and so on and so on. So there's this idea of this type of a separation. And then there's cultural recreation, which just means we walk in and we'll give benefits to those who can actually match our culture, right? So we want to match culture for culture. And you see this quite a bit during the early formation of our country in the so cultures that don't exist anymore, the Romans, the Babylonians, Mesopotamians, or these are the Egyptians, early Egyptians. These were folks that would go in, after the Greeks would go in, conquer a land, and then give them an opportunity to accept their cultural norms. And if you did, there were less taxes, there were better opportunities for you. So it's the idea of coming in and devastating the people, and then saying, if you want it to be better for yourself, then do things like we do. So those are the four major ways that colonies actually work and function. So again, I talked a little bit about the caste system based upon race. There are other caste systems that are based upon social economics. I believe, right? So Sean believes that our country is formed on a dual caste system, to where your race and your economics kind of go hand in hand. But again, you may say, well, Sean, what about Bill Cosby? He's rich and I mean, he's in jail. But what about Barack Obama? What about 50 Cent? What about Oprah? What about all these people who are who have transcended up to great deals of wealth? Well, any system that's based upon wealth will allow other nuances to take place, right? And so that's how you keep the American dream alive, is that you create a system that is difficult for a particular group to get ahead, but not outlandishly difficult. Again, a major part of oppression is setting up obstacles that keep people from moving steadily up the line. And so when you look at the sundown laws, when you look at, so up until 1964, the oppressions that people of color, black folks, received was legal and justified. So you're looking at 1619, 16, that's right, 1619, the beginning of slavery, until 1964, right? You're looking at hundreds of years of oppression that were legal and justified. And so you look at all those things being put on people, right? It becomes very difficult for someone to start the race the same way. So that's something to keep in mind. The idea of alienating people from themselves, you can alienate people from their culture. You can alienate people from other races, and you can alienate people from your own cultural standards to correct what you would consider bad behavior, right? And so there was a term that was presented to me when I was a police officer, and it was I was being called an Oreo, right? So you're black on the outside, white in the middle, or an apple, you're red on the outside, you're white in the middle, or a banana, you're yellow on the outside, but you're white in the middle. And these are negative terms for folks of color who people think, well, you've sold your own people out for something that's bigger and better. But there is a particular way in which you can separate people from their own cultural norms to get them to behave a particular way. So we have adaptation, and adaptation just means, let's see, you have culture appropriation, where you'll find, and I don't believe in culture appropriation, because anyone can engage in anyone's cultural norms if they want to, right? So if you're white, you want to do rap. If you're black, you want to do country, you want to do metal, you can do whatever else. So we talk about a ethnic group, which is the outside part, plus cultural norms. Any ethnic group can decide to take on any other culture they want to, right? It's just rites, rituals, traditions, customs, and habits. So anyone can do those things. I think it becomes problematic when someone who does not represent that culture takes a staple from that culture and presents it to TV or media, and they can just kind of blow up. And some examples of that would be Kylie Jenner, when she put her dreadlocks in, or she had braids, and everyone's like, oh my goodness, your cornrows are so phenomenal. They hashtag cornrows, but cornrows are a staple hairstyle for African Americans since forever, right? And so That might become problematic when you are gaining resources from another cultural group, especially if you don't recognize where it comes from. Like, it's like, oh yeah, I like to thank the African American community for sharing their culture with me. That's why I have these. But that's something that I think is more than appropriate to adopt another cultural norm. So as you are looking at being colonized, if you are part of a colonized group, there are three ways in which you can fight against colonization. One is to assimilate, meaning, well, we've been conquered. Only thing we can do now is become just like you, right? And so that's kind of the way in which those who are conquerors wanted to be. We walk in, we conquer you, and now we want you guys to behave like us. That's the best idea for those that conquer. The second one, which is not that helpful to those that are trying to conquer, is to fight back, which is that rebel. Like, it's the idea of, hey, we're coming into your land, your country, and we want your stuff. So then people say, nope, we're going to fight. And so then you end up having a war, and that's not good neither, right? And so you've got violence going on. And the other thing that I see a lot of, that I think is going on, is the idea of deviant behavior and crime, right? And so, so when you look at neighborhoods that have a high level of crime, you'll also find low economic statuses in those neighborhoods, right? And so there are multiple research studies on if you can rise the level of economics in the neighborhood, as more people are able to work, less and less crime takes place. And so one way to fix the issue is to literally give people skills and create jobs in lower income neighborhoods to where folks don't feel the stress and the pressure of being a deviant or doing negative things in their neighborhood. So we have, there are three subordinate concepts as it relates to homeland and wealth, right? And so number one way to stifle a group of people is to stifle them economically. Like, we're going to actually keep you from moving up the ladder, right? And that's a direct kind of economic attack on a group of people. Like, we're not going to allow you to have good jobs. We're not going to allow you to be able to move up the thing. And that is a true tactic, and one that you find literally in India, right? And also in South Africa. You see this same tactic being used in Australia with the Aborigines. But it's an idea of and you also see it here in you also see it here in America, to where before 1964, if you were black, you couldn't have a particular job, right? So we're going to make sure that you cannot move up the social economics deal. The other thing which can be done is political subordination, which means, number one, we're not going to let you vote, right? So if you can't vote, you can't change policies and procedures. And when you can vote, we're not going to give you any representation, meaning you have to vote for this white person or that white person, but there are no people of color or no other people of color or sexual orientation or anything else. You can pick these two. And so whether your politic is Democratic or Republican, it's a really big deal that we have a vice president who, we'll see whether or not Joe Biden and Kamala Harris get elected to the next presidency. So I'm not saying vote for this person or don't vote for this person. I'm just saying that it's a big deal that we had Barack Obama run for president and get it, right? Being the first black president. And so very rarely are you given appropriate representation to actually vote for. Then there's social subordination, which literally is the idea of creating rules and laws at the social level that contradict people, meaning you can't move into our neighborhood, don't talk to those people. And so those are the three major ways of keeping people down. Number one is economics, number two is political, and number three is social. And that is the lecture for today. Again, this would take the whole entire class period, but because there's no one to ask questions to, I'm just going to give you the information. Please read the book. If you have any questions, let me know. Take care. Peace.